changed by these lessons. First delivered to me by Dr. Fred Gibbs when he knocked on my door there in Berea, Kentucky, and he handed me the first two lessons. He said, "I will be to get you." My car was down at the time. So he was there on time, like the next about 2 nights later. And we went through those first two lessons. The Lord magnificently blessed our lessons together. He came and got me at every scheduled time. And he's a real humble person. Doctored my children in his spare time, looked after them. And he just done a lot of good things for the church. A humble minister of the Lord, and I highly praise him for his devotion to Jesus. He and his wife resides in North Carolina, Asheville, North Carolina, and we email them and stay in contact on a regular basis. And hopefully we get to worship with them this side before the coming of the Messiah, our blessed Lord. Okay, question 5 is entitled, "To worship or not to worship?" That is the question that I asked of thee. All right, we want to have some fun with these, and at the same time we want to notice that God is very serious about this prophecy, about this letter to the peoples of earth that he has delivered to us through much sweat and blood. And he also gave his own life in order for us to be retrieved. He has a retrieval plan for Project Earth, and this prophecy is dead center of the spotlight of that retrieval plan. In every chapter of Daniel thus far, we have seen illustrated the great cosmic controversy. In chapter 1, the issue was obedience to God versus obedience to man. Chapter 2, we are shown through earth history that God will ultimately triumph. Now in chapter 3, we are introduced to the other main issue in the book of Daniel over which there is conflict, the issue of worship. Keep that in mind, worship and obedience. Those are the issues confronting people in the last days. Here we have an attempt by powers that be to impose false worship. We see 3 young men standing firmly for God when the whole world worships falsely. Daniel's 3 friends were tempted yet resisted. Likewise, God's people in the last days will be commanded to worship falsely but will refuse. They will have such a solid relationship with God that no one can compel them to worship falsely. The parallels between Daniel 3 and Revelation 13 are striking. In this lesson, we will examine carefully the story in Daniel 3 and consider a few of the general parallels to Revelation chapter 13. In lesson 22, we will examine in much greater detail the parallels between Daniel 3 and Revelation 13 and how they impact our day. The events of Daniel 3 occurred several years after Daniel interpreted King Nebuchadnezzar's dream of the great statue. Although Nebuchadnezzar apparently acknowledged Daniel's God as a God of gods and began to follow the true God, evidently he is no longer doing so. Nebuchadnezzar, like many of us, had slipped back into his former ways. Describe the statue that Nebuchadnezzar set up.
An image of gold.
An image of gold is found in the plain of Dura.
90 feet high, 9 feet wide.
90 feet high. Hold on a minute. That's 9 basketball goals. So if you take a 10-foot basketball goal, just picture 9 of them stacked on each other. That's up there. We're looking at something that's as high as one of our skyscrapers in New York City. Go ahead and set it up.
9 feet wide, and set up on the plains of Dura.
So it's as wide as a basketball goal, here. Note, this imposing sight on the plains of Dura Nebuchadnezzar made all of gold to indicate that his kingdom would last forever. He didn't want the silver kingdom coming and taking his over. But it happened. This was in contrast to the image of Daniel 2, which was made up of various metals and indicated a succession of empires. Nebuchadnezzar was defying the God of heaven. Question 2, who were invited to the dedication of the image?
The satraps, the prefects, the governors, adversities, treasurers, judges, magistrates, and the provincial officers.
Provincial officers. What we might say is the sheriffs, the magistrates, the governors, the congressmen, All the politicians. Note, most key leaders in the realm of Babylon were invited to the dedication of the statue. History tells us that there had recently been a rebellion in Babylon, and the king questioned the loyalty of his subjects. The dedication of the image would be an opportunity for everyone in the realm to pledge their loyalty to the government. Not to bow down would be considered treason. Perhaps there were other Jewish leaders present as well, but only 3 stood firm to God. Question 3, what were all these rulers to do when the music sounded?
You must fall down and worship the image of gold.
Daniel 3:3-5. Notice that false worship of the image, was the issue that faced the 3 young men. Question 4, what penalty would be received by those who failed to worship the image?
They will immediately be thrown into a blazing furnace.
A furnace of fire. Daniel 3:6. A refusal to worship falsely. Next section, question 5. What charge did the Chaldeans make concerning certain Jews?
They neither serve your gods nor worship the image of gold you have set up.
Daniel 3:7-12. They don't worship that image, king. We've seen them. They did not bow down. Note, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego must have really stood out when the entire crowd bowed at the sound of the music. Yeah, like a sore thumb. It would have been very easy to rationalize that they weren't really worshiping the image, but just showing their loyalty to the king. But they knew that loyalty to God was involved. Therefore, they would not bow down. Question 6. What commandment forbade false worship?
The second commandment, you shall not make for yourself an image. You shall not bow down to them or worship them.
Bingo! Right dead center of the spotlight is the second commandment, the commandments of God, the eternal law, the sacred oracles. Exodus 24-6. Note, for the 3 men to bow down and worship golden image would be disobedient to a commandment of God. The issues of worship and obedience to the commandments of God are both illustrated in this story. Remember that the focal point of Daniel is the last days. Later in this lesson, as we compare this chapter with the book of Revelation, we will see that time will come in the last days when true worship will be forbidden. People will be commanded to worship contrary to God's commandments. But his people will always be obedient. Question 7, when Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego were brought before the king, King Nebuchadnezzar, to answer the charges against them, how did he threaten them?
You will be thrown immediately into a blazing furnace.
Daniel 3:13-15. No time wasted. The king said, death decree. Note, Nebuchadnezzar gave the 3 young men a second chance. He could have thrown them in at their first refusal to worship. He knew that they were bright students of the university. He put them in charge of certain affairs of the province. Question 8. Did the men need time to think it over?
We do not need to defend ourselves.
They didn't have to think it over. Daniel 3:16. The expression simply means that they did not need to explain their position. They had made their decision. Before they came to the plain of Dura, they had decided not to yield, no matter how they were threatened. They could not be intimidated. Obedience to God was more important than a display of loyalty to the king that involved false worship. Question 9. Go ahead. How did the men respond to Nebuchadnezzar's offer of a second chance? Verses 17-18.
If we are thrown into the blazing furnace, the God we serve is able to save us from it. But even if he does not, we will not serve your gods or worship the image of gold.
Even if he doesn't deliver, we're not bowing down. No. What a tremendous testimony of faith. This is the focal point of the entire story. If God delivered them, that would be fine, but even if he didn't, they still wouldn't serve him. Their faithfulness to God did not depend upon their deliverance. They did not obey God because of what he could do for them. Their obedience sprang out of principle. So it will be with God's people in the last days. Whether God delivers them from persecution or even certain death is not the key factor. The only thing that really matters is that they love God and are obedient to him, even to death. The fiery furnace. Question 10, how did Nebuchadnezzar respond to Hebrews' defense?
He ordered the furnace heated 7 times hotter than usual.
Well, now he's gotten real mad. Daniel 3:19. He just got blazing mad. He's defiled. I gave them positions in my kingdom and everything, and now they just will not cooperate with me. Heated up 7 times hotter. Question 11. What happened to the soldiers who threw Shadrach, Meshach,